happened in Gaza to the extent that it's even remembered. When people refer back, they speak of the Gaza War, the war in Gaza. Even respected, reputable human rights organizations, in the reports they've released since the attack, they refer to the war in Gaza. And Israel was very emphatic that there was a war in Gaza. In fact, they were very pleased by the fact that there was a war in Gaza, because they said after the 22-day assault, they said, now we've shown those Arabs who's who and what's what and who's in charge in this corner of the world. And how did we show the Arabs? How do we restore our deterrence capacity? Well, they said, we won the war in Gaza. We won the war in Gaza. But then along came an Israeli strategic analyst, and he said, it's very dangerous for Israel to believe it won the war in Gaza when there was no war. In reality, not a single battle was fought during the 22 days of fighting. A former Israeli foreign ministry official, he said, there was no war. Hamas sat in its bunkers and came out when it was all over. Well, if there was no war in Gaza, then what did happen? On the military plane, it's pretty straightforward. The Israelis supplied the statistics, no reason to dispute these particular numbers. The war began, or the assault began, with what was called the air phase of the assault, the first week. And then after 22 days, the Israelis flew about 2,800 to 3,000 combat missions over Gaza. Every plane returned. Not a single plane was downed. In fact, not a single plane was even damaged, which is not altogether too surprising, because there were no, the Palestinians had no anti-aircraft defenses to speak of. After the first week, January 3rd, began what was called the land and air assault phase of the attack. The Israeli soldiers had special night warfare equipment. Hamas couldn't even see them, let alone tangle with them. So, no fighting, no battles, no planes downed, no planes damaged. Hamas couldn't even see the Israeli soldiers when they entered Gaza. So what did happen in Gaza? And here we have what you might call unimpeachable testimony on what actually happened. We have the testimony of the Israeli soldiers after the invasion. They gave public witness to what they personally experienced. Soldier, there was nothing there. Ghost towns, except for some livestock, nothing moved. Soldier, most of the time it was boring. There were really not too many events. Soldier, I did not see one single Arab the whole time we were there, that whole week. Soldier, everyone was disappointed about not engaging anyone. Soldier, usually we did not see a living soul, except for our soldiers, of course, not a soul. Soldier, go ahead, ask the other soldiers how often they encountered combatants in Gaza. Nothing. No one. Soldier, there was supposed to be a tiny resistance force upon entering Gaza, but there just wasn't any. It's kind of surreal. A war with one side. It's even kind of funny. There are some people in the second row, and I can see others who are smiling, laughing. Yeah, it would be funny. It would be very humorous, were it not for the other side. On the other side, you should check on your own. It's always good to confirm for yourself. I grew up in a time where a lot of people used to wear a button, a black button with white letters. It said, question authority. And that's a useful thing to keep in mind. There was a very smart little Jewish boy in Europe. He went by the name of Carlos Marx. And Mr. Marx was once asked what's the credo by which he lives, and because he was a smart little Jewish boy, of course, he answered in Latin, and he said, De omnibus dubitandum. And since I'm at Oxford, when there are a lot of smart little boys and girls, not all Jewish, at least half of you must know what that means. De omnibus dubitandum. It means, anyone? I know you're at a loss because you can't Google it. And you haven't seen it on YouTube. And nobody has text messaged it to you. It just means to doubt everything. And you should check for yourself, and it's very simple. All you have to do is enter the words breaking the silence in your Google search. And what will come up on your screen is a collection of the Israeli soldier testimonies on what they experienced. And then you just go to the search function and you enter the word insane. And if you enter the word insane in the search function for this document, it comes up once, twice, 3 times insane, 4 times insane, 5 times insane, 6 times insane, 7 times insane. The soldiers were interviewed separately. They weren't cueing each other, but the same word kept leaping to mind for one soldier after another. Israel used insane amounts of firepower in Gaza. Israel used insane amounts of firepower in Gaza. Israel used insane amounts of firepower in Gaza. No battles, no fighting, no enemy in the field. But Israel is using insane amounts of firepower in Gaza. One soldier said, "This was firepower such as I had never known. There were blasts all the time. The earth was constantly shaking." Another soldier said, "On the ground you hear these thunderous blasts all day long. I mean, not just tank shelling, which is a tune we'd long gotten used to, but blasts that actually rocked the outpost, to the extent that some of us were ordered out of the house we were quartered in for fear it would collapse." The Israeli soldiers entered Gaza, commandeered Palestinian homes, and from the homes they're firing into the horizon. But these insane amounts of firepower are causing the ground underneath them to quake. And so they're told to abandon the houses because the houses might fall on them. So what did happen in Gaza? Well, is there a problem? Okay. So what did happen in Gaza? Actually, the Israeli soldiers themselves provide the most telling metaphors, the most revealing similes of what happened in Gaza. One soldier said, "It felt like hunting season had begun. Sometimes it reminded me of a PlayStation computer game." Another soldier said, "You felt like a child playing around with a magnifying glass, burning up ants." You felt like a child with a magnifying glass, burning up ants. It's an interesting image to bear in mind. A few days ago, there were 2 Israeli soldiers who were convicted of having used a Palestinian child as a human shield in Gaza. And a couple of days ago, the sentence was handed down, and the soldiers were given a 3-month suspended sentence. And the judge had to explain why it was such a light sentence, a ridiculous sentence. And the judge said, well, you have to bear in mind the dangerous combat conditions in Gaza that the soldiers faced, the dangerous combat conditions. Well, I was a child. I'm not proud of the fact that I had my magnifying glass and I focused the rays of the sun, turned the ants into crispy critters. As I say, I'm not proud of it, but I didn't suffer from the delusion back then that I was engaged in dangerous combat conditions. As a matter of fact, the simile was remarkably apt. like a child with a magnifying glass burning up ants. One of the substances Israel used in Gaza was the white phosphorus, and Israel routinely uses white phosphorus in its conflicts with its neighboring Arab and Muslim countries. I remember as far back as 1982, when I first got involved in the conflict publicly, that Israel was already then using the white phosphorus. I never paid much attention to the details. Sounded kind of sinister, white phosphorus. But this time I did look into the details from curiosity. White phosphorus, it reaches a temperature of 816 degrees Celsius. 816 degrees Celsius. As our own Oprah Winfrey would say, try wrapping your mind around that one. So what did Israel do with the white phosphorus? Well, Human Rights Watch had produced a report called Rain of Fire, describing Israel's use of white phosphorus in Gaza. And Human Rights Watch concluded, and now I'm quoting it, Israel repeatedly exploded white phosphorus munitions in the air over populated areas, killing and injuring civilians and damaging civilian structures. It used the white phosphorus on a school, Beit Lahia school, on a marketplace, on a humanitarian aid warehouse. It used the white phosphorus on 2 hospitals, on Al-Wafa Hospital and on Al-Quds Hospital. According to Human Rights Watch, the hospitals were clearly marked, and there does not appear to have been fighting in that immediate area. By the end of the 22 days, 1,400 Palestinians were killed, of whom up to 4/5, up to 1,200 were civilians, 400 were children. On the Israeli side, 13 Israelis were killed, of whom 3 were civilians, 10 were combatants, and of the 10 combatants, half of them were killed by other Israelis by accident, the technical term being friendly fire. So all told, for every 100 Palestinians killed, 1 Israeli was killed. For every 400 Palestinian civilians killed, 1 Israeli civilian was killed. And now you have to use your own faculty of judgment. 100 to 1, 400 to 1. Is that a war or is that a massacre? Is it a war or is it a bloodbath? Every time you hear the media or someone you know or you yourself refer to the Gaza war, you've become an instrument of, intentionally or not, you become an instrument of Israeli propaganda. There was no war in Gaza. There was a massacre in Gaza. But of course, Israel has its explanations. Israel has its reasons. It always does. And Israel said that if there were a large number of deaths in Gaza, even a large number of civilian deaths, it wasn't our fault. Because you know Hamas, they're not just crazed, they're also cowards. And they use the Palestinian civilians as human shields. And if Palestinians were killed, it's because Hamas in effect forced us to kill Palestinian civilians because Hamas was hiding behind them. So if I were to ask people in this audience, how many of you are aware of the allegation by Israel that Hamas had used Palestinian civilians as human shields? How many know that? Raise your hand up high. So it's virtually everybody in the room. You'd have to be either brain dead or having made excessive use of mind-altering drugs not to be aware of that allegation. It was so widely disseminated. Now, as it happened, all the human rights organizations, they invested that allegation because it was Israel's principal alibi. And so they're by now